Before America existed, this land was already alive. Millions of people called it home. Forests, rivers, mountains, plains, all bustling with life. Contrary to the stories you may have heard in school, this was not an empty land waiting to be discovered. It was full of people with civilizations, governments, trade, religion, art, and science. And in just a few hundred years, everything would change. Let's start with the East Coast. The Iroquois Confederacy was a complex political system uniting 6 nations, with councils, laws, and decisions made collectively. These were societies with organized governments, judicial systems, and even checks and balances in leadership centuries before European settlers wrote constitutions. In the Southwest, the ancestral Pueblo peoples built multi-story stone cities and intricate irrigation systems in some of the harshest desert environments. They farmed maize and beans, creating food security in a landscape that would challenge most civilizations. On the Great Plains, nomadic tribes followed bison herds across thousands of miles. Hunting with precision and respecting nature, they understood the delicate balance between taking from the land and preserving it. Along the Pacific coast, tribes had rich fishing economies, sophisticated trade routes, and even ceremonial potlatches to redistribute wealth. Every region had its own laws, trade networks, spirituality, and culture. These people were not primitives. They were civilizations, thriving and interconnected. When Europeans arrived in the late 1400s and 1500s, they didn't discover a new world. They entered someone else's world. Initially, contact was cautious. Explorers, traders, and missionaries arrived. Some tribes welcomed them, others were wary. Few could predict the disasters to come. Europeans had a different worldview. Land could be owned, divided, and claimed with paper and flags. To them, land unused in European ways, land cultivated differently, or sacred land, was empty and therefore free to take. This thinking would justify some of the greatest injustices in history. Before battles were fought, entire populations were already falling. Smallpox, measles, and influenza, diseases that Europeans had lived with for generations, swept through native communities. No immunity existed. Imagine villages of hundreds, thriving for centuries, wiped out in weeks. In some regions, up to 90% of indigenous people died within decades of first contact. This was the first weapon of colonization, invisible, unstoppable, and devastating. Disease had already weakened communities. Now came the politics. European settlers and colonial governments drafted treaties. Sign here, and we promise peace, they said. Then they broke those promises. Then they made new promises and broke them too. Resistance by native people was labeled rebellion or hostility. Violence by settlers was called progress or civilization. Words mattered. Language mattered. Dehumanizing labels, like calling people savages or uncivilized, made it easier to justify taking land, destroying cultures, and erasing identities. Tribes were pushed from fertile lands onto harsh territory. Hunting grounds were destroyed. Sacred sites were desecrated. Children were often separated from families in attempts to erase culture and language. This was systemic racism, structured into policy and everyday life. But despite all of it, native communities survived. They adapted. They resisted. They preserved traditions, languages, and stories, even when much of the world wanted them erased. This era is crucial. It shows us that land was taken, people were dehumanized, and policies created systems of inequality. And yet, survival continued. The foundations of the United States We're late on this contradiction, a nation claiming freedom built on someone else's suffering. Understanding this first era is essential before moving to colonization, revolution, and expansion. Before there was America, there were nations. Before borders, there were peoples. And before power, there was land, shared, not owned. Next time, we'll explore the European colonization era and how the settler mindset reshaped the continent. This is the story of America, the untold truth.